Now, the philosophers, for whatever that's worth, question the role of the body versus the role of the mind. And it's an interesting subject, but it's not exactly what we're going to be focusing on. To the philosopher, the two sides to human self is the physical and the mental. How do they work together? All right. That's not our question. Our question is the physical or the spiritual or the godly, which is the real you. Because there are places in Hasidus where it says the real you is your animal soul. And there are places in Hasidus where it says the real you is the Jew in you, the godly soul. So who are you really? So we've already spoken about the idea that real and true are two different realities. So you can really be your animal soul, but truly be your godly soul. And it's not a contradiction. There may be a conflict, because they have different wants, but it's not a contradiction. In reality, for real, you are your animal soul. In truth, you're your godly soul. The difference being, what's real could also be temporary. It's real today, tomorrow will be a different reality. Whereas truth is unchanging. So truth is what must be, even if it doesn't happen to be right now. This resolves a lot of problems with one simple answer. The Torah says something, and you say, yeah, but in reality it's not like that. So what's your question? The Torah is talking about what's true, and you're saying that this truth is not real in reality. So it will be. If not today, tomorrow. So that whole conflict, that whole, like, who's right and how can that be? They're both real. Just don't confuse temporary reality with truth. So let's take a look at some of the texts that we're dealing with. Like on page 171. The question for discussion is, do you think that the self and the body are two distinct entities, or are they one and the same? So this is part of the mind-body controversy. Are you your body or are you your mind? And what is the mind? How does it work? From a secular perspective, the mind is simply electrical impulses. Where do they come from? Nobody seems to know. But it's very revealing that we can talk about our bodies as if it were a stranger. A person says, my leg hurts. The leg that belongs to me. So who's me? Obviously not the leg. My whole body hurts. My body. So obviously the body is not me. On the other hand, when a person says, I'm dizzy, that's more serious. Your whole being is dizzy? That's dangerous. A person who says, my head is spinning, is not as dangerous as a person who says, I'm dizzy. Because you can separate yourself from your head also. My head. My brain. Well, then you're not the brain. And the brain is not you. Because you can step away and observe it like a third party. Some guy who was doing some experiments on the brain, I forget what his name was, got very excited because he claimed to have discovered the soul. He was doing this experiment where he had a bunch of electrodes connected to a person's brain, and he was pushing the buttons that made the brain cause movement in the body. So when he stimulated a certain part of the brain, the person raised his hand. And as a joke, he said to the patient, he said, why'd you raise your hand? He was joking because he had raised the guy's hand by stimulating that part of the brain. But the patient said, I didn't do it. And it freaked him out. Because if your brain did it, as far as anybody knows, you are your brain. So if your brain caused your hand to rise, what do you mean you didn't do it? Who's talking? So all of a sudden there's an I that is not the body and it's not the brain. So we can talk about the brain like it's a third, a stranger. So who's talking? Text 4. What does the Torah say about the human being? Nasa Adam b'tzalmeinu kidmuseinu. On the one hand, the Eibishter says, let's make a godly creature. Godly in the sense, created in the image of God. But the very next sentence says, what did Eibishter do? He formed the human of the soil of the earth. Not very godly at all. And then he breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the human became a living soul. And he called it Adam. In the next text, it explains what Adam means. He called their name Adam. What does that mean, actually? He called their name. It's either he called them Adam or he named them Adam. In English, it doesn't work out very well. But he named this being Adam. Why? So the Shalah says, and a lot of Tanya is based on the Shalah. So the Shalah says that the name Adam can go one of two ways. Im davakul l'mayla, if a person connects himself above and emulates God and goes in his ways, then the reason he's called Adam is because the word Adam means similar. Adame, like doime, similar. So the reason he's called Adam is because he's like God. On the other hand, if a person separates himself from this divine attachment, then he's called Adam, because the word Adam means earth. Adama. So you're either godly or you're dust. It's pretty extreme option. Figure 5 makes it pretty clear. It's either Adame, which means similar, or Adama, which means earth, but generally Adam means human. So Adam is a combination of God-like and earth. All other creatures, by the way, nothing else was created in the same pattern. God said, "Let the earth give forth living beings," and all of a sudden there were living beings. There was never a moment that the body of an animal existed without its, whatever you call it, soul, spirit, energy, life. So there was never a lifeless animal that needed to be brought to life. But with the human being, God creates a lifeless body and then brings it to life. Which means that the animal was never a mineral. The animal body was never a mineral. The human body started off as a mineral, a lump of clay, and then came alive. In this sense, the human body is lower than the animal body. Now that was true, of course, of Adam. We don't have that same experience. We don't have human bodies first existing as a mineral and then coming alive. That never happens anymore. So is the contrast of the godly and the physical still true? So he quotes from the Siddur, from the davening. The soul you give me is pure, you created it, you formed it, you breathed it into me, and you keep it within me. What do we see from this? I am not my soul. I have a soul in me, so who's the me? So to get to the real core of who we are, we have to look to Tanya, where he says that first of all, we live because we have a soul. The brain itself is no different than any other part of the body, and if you're going to ask where does the arm get its life, you have to ask where does the brain get its life. The brain is certainly not the source of life, although it is the center of life. And that's why we can do heart transplants. We can't yet do brain transplants, because the center of life is in the brain. Or in the oxygen of the brain. In other words, the most spiritual ingredient in the body is where life connects to the body. So the question of how do you bring together a spiritual entity, a soul, I'm not talking about the godly soul, any soul, life. Life is a spiritual thing, a non-physical, metaphysical. The body is physical. How do they come together? Where is their first point of contact. So like in any chain, the lowest part of the upper link intersects with the highest part of the lower link. So the lowest of the spiritual connects to the highest or the most refined of the physical. So it says somewhere that the animal soul is in the blood. How does it connect to the blood? It actually connects to the vapor or to the heat that the blood gives off. So the most spiritual part of the body is the warmth of the blood. What is the most physical part of the soul? Emotions. Because the soul is made up of intelligence and emotions. So the emotions is the lowest part, and in the emotions there's the lowest emotion of malchus. So that connects to the warmth that rises from the blood. I don't know where the blood gets its warmth. So it's like the blood gets its warmth from the soul, but the soul connects. But somehow, this miraculous connection between body and soul, which we make a bracha over, Asher Yotzar, and we recognize the miracle of mafli lases, the wondrous behavior of connection of body and soul. That's the animal soul. So first we have to know that life is in the soul. It's not in any part of the body, including the mind. So the whole thing about I think, therefore I am, that whole narishkeit, it sounds impressive, but it's really rather meaningless. What makes it interesting is that we have two souls. So one of the biggest contributions that Hasidus made to Jewish life is that it changed the conversation from Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov. That was the conversation before Hasidus. Our conflict, our challenge in life, the goal in life is to follow the Yetzer Tov and not the Yetzer Hara. The evil inclination versus the good inclination, that's the challenge of life. That's the center of all the whole drama. And we want the good inclination to win over the evil inclination. It doesn't really tell you much about the human condition. I can be good and I can be bad. I still don't know who I am. Who's the me? The good and the bad, by the way, exists in the animal soul. It's not like all goodness comes from the godly soul and all evil comes from the animal soul. That's not true, because that would describe the human as essentially evil. And that's not true. Good and evil are both conditions within the human being. You can do good, you can do evil. That doesn't tell you who you are. You are tempted to do good, you're also tempted to do evil. So who are you? Neither. So the debate, are you really your Yetzer Hara or are you really your Yetzer Tov? Are you really a good guy misbehaving or are you a lousy person trying to be nice? That's not even a good question. You're neither. You're a human being and you have both ingredients. because a Yetzer Hara is just an ingredient. It's a mood. It's a disposition. It's not a description or a definition of the human being. So to say some people are good, some people are bad, well, yeah, that's true. I still don't know what a person is. So you can say this is a good tree or it's a bad tree. I don't know what a tree is. So the Alter Rebbe comes along and says, stop with this fascination with your Yetzer Hara or your Yetzer Tov. You have two souls, not two moods. And a soul is a definition of the human being. What is a human being? A soul. What is a soul? A soul is a living entity comprised of 10 functions, or 12. So if a soul is the definition of a human being, what does it mean we have two souls? That's really scary. You're two people. Every Jew is two people. Because you have two souls. A soul is a complete being, a complete person. So you have a human person and you have a godly person. That's very different than a good mood and a bad mood. So let's think about this a second. Animal soul versus godly soul, is that the same as good and bad? Is the animal soul bad? Is the godly soul good? Those terms do not define them. An animal soul is not bad, and therefore you're not allowed to kill your animal soul. Before Tanya, before Hasidus, when the issue was Yetzer Hara, Yetzer Tov, when that was the struggle, yes, kill your Yetzer Hara, go right ahead. Don't ever be in a bad mood again. Is that dangerous? If you kill your Yetzer Hara, you're a healthy person. You never lose your temper again.
Except for yesterday.
Huh?
Except for yesterday.
Since yesterday. From now on. So if you kill your Yetzer Hara, you're a perfectly healthy person. You're a very healthy person. You're also nice to be with. Easy to get along with. So you've improved yourself when you kill your Yetzer Hara. But kill your animal soul? That's destructive. That's horrible. It's a whole person. Secondly, if the struggle is between a godly soul and an animal soul, that's a much more elegant battle. That's much more dignified. The struggle is not, should I be nice to you or should I hurt you? That's an ugly condition. And even if I decide, no, I'm going to be nice to you, so what have I accomplished? I'm not a murderer? You're proud of that? I didn't hurt anybody today. Wow, what a tzaddik. That's not an accomplishment, much. On the other hand, if the choice is animal soul, godly soul, well, that's amazing. You can either be a good human being or you could be a godly being. And you choose to be a godly being? That's amazing, because what's wrong with just being a good human being? Most people would be content with that. So in a sense, if you follow your godly soul, you're going beyond the letter of the law. Because if you followed your animal soul, you would be a very nice human being. But you went beyond that. So it's beyond the letter of the law. Now that is a dignified battle. Those are nice choices. You want to be good or you want to be God? Now the
It's a hardly within the animal soul
and the Yetzer Tov.
and the Yetzer Tov.
The Yetzer Tov is the more intelligent, decent part of your animal soul. The Yetzer Hara is the nasty side of your animal soul.
And in the godly soul, what lies there aside from godliness? Only godliness.
Right. So to describe a godly soul as good is misleading. You don't need a godly soul to be good.
By definition, it's good.
Which, I mean, that's a huge statement. You don't need a godly soul to be good, which means non-Jews who don't have a godly soul
Can still be good. Yes.
can be completely good.
Can they be godly?
Through the mitzvahs.
Where does it go? What does it affect?
In some way, it introduces an immortality to an otherwise mortal soul. So the difference between good and godly, good is mortal. You're a good guy, but you're going to die. Whereas godliness is eternal, immortal. So who has a portion in the world to come? The righteous Gentile.
Which means they simply have to keep those 7 mitzvahs.
As mitzvahs.
As mitzvahs.
So the non-Jew who keeps the 7 mitzvahs because it's a mitzvah has also gone beyond the letter of the law. What's wrong with doing the mitzvahs just because you're a nice guy?
It's not connected to the godly part.
And that's why they're called Chasidei Umeis Ha'olam. Righteous is not the right, the translation is not useful. They're not called Tzadikei Umeis Ha'olam. They're not the tzaddikim among the nations. They are the Hasidim among the nations. Why are they called that? Because the non-Jew who keeps all 7 commandments, all 30 or whatever they are, 300, he keeps them perfectly because he's a nice guy. That would be a tzaddik. But if the non-Jew keeps the mitzvahs because they're mitzvahs, then he's going beyond the letter of the law. That's called chassid. So there are, in fact, righteous Gentiles, but that's not who we are referring to when we say Chasidei Umas Ha'olam. So among the righteous Gentiles, they're those who saved Jews during the Holocaust. Why? Why? Because they didn't understand killing people for nothing. That's not godly. That's goodly. So they are correctly called the righteous Gentile, not the Hasidic Gentile.
So do they get an immortal soul or no?
Only the Chasidei Umeis Ha'olam get the eternal soul. If God is your motivation, well, God is eternal. If good is your motivation, good is mortal. So, what is the problem with having 2 souls? You know, the more, if a soul is a good thing, let's have a lot of souls. The more the better. The problem is that they're incompatible. They're incompatible because they are mutually exclusive. One does not allow for the other. They're pulling in opposite directions by their very nature. From dust you are, and to dust you will return. The animal soul is drawn downward. Not evil, just earth. Whereas the godly soul is drawn upward. Let's see the text that he brings for that. Yeah, a piece of Tanya. Text 10. Tanya chapter 19. Listen to what he says about the godly soul. Can you read it in Hebrew or in English? Why is the soul, the neshama, why is it compared to a lamp or to a flame? What is it about the flame? If we were to say everything naturally is drawn to its source. Nothing wants to be separated from its source, from its life source. You get homesick. Everything is homesick. In fact, according to Hasidus, what exactly is gravity? Homesickness. You take a stone away from the earth, it wants to go back. It wants to go home. So since everything is created from the earth, you try to separate something from earth, it will pull back. It will fight to go home. That's gravity. There's one exception, and that is fire. Fire doesn't go down, it goes up. In fact, it fights to go up. Even when it's connected to a wick, it wants to leave the wick. So it's constantly jumping upwards. Only the wick holds it down. So what is the direction of fire? Away from the earth. Why is that? The simple answer is, The simple answer is that the source of fire is not earth. So the fire, or the little flame, is homesick. It wants to go back to its source. Only its source is up there, not down here. So fire is not an exception. It also wants to go home. What makes it an exception is when the stone falls back to earth, it's at rest. It's a perfect stone. When the fire goes back to where it came from, it's not a fire anymore. So the stone comes back to earth to solidify its existence. You can want to go home because there you get more attention. You're stronger at home. You get more attention at home. Or you want to go home because you don't want to be an individual. You want to be absorbed into the family. So are you looking for more of yourself, or are you looking for less of yourself? It's really fascinating in graphology. You look at how a person signs their name. The signature tells you so much. So just very simply, a person writes his name, the initial, the first letter of his first name, of his personal name, is large and well developed. The first letter of his family name is kind of, it tells you a lot. The person is very proud to be who he is. He's not very proud of where he comes from. Or the reverse. The letter, the initial of his first name is kind of underdeveloped, but his family name is nicely formed, and so he'd rather be a member of the family than an individual. He's proud of the fact that he's from that family. He's not so proud of his own personal achievements. Or he'd rather be part of the family rather than be an individual. So the fire is drawn back to its source, but not because it wants to solidify its existence. It wants to surrender its existence. It becomes invisible, unidentifiable. It is still fire energy, but it's not a flame anymore. Separate from other flames. So it loses itself in its source. Here he describes it as I am or I am not. I'm me or I'm not me. If I'm not me, then what am I?
What does that mean? I am me and you are you.
If I'm me because you are you, and you're you because of me, and then you but here we're talking about not being me by becoming my source. So who am I really? The me that is separate from the source, or the me that is the source? The answer is yes. The me that is separate from my source, that's a reality. The me that is my source, that's the truth. So what is a Jew? His animal soul or his godly soul?
Could you repeat? The me that is separate from my source is reality. The me that is, what is true?
My source.
The me that is my source is true.
The not me.
The not me.
Not me means I'm my source, where I don't stand separate.
But you know, there's a part that gets me, because you're saying that the animal soul wants to be connected to its source, which is the earth. Did you say that?
From dust you are, and to dust you will return.
So how is it a soul? How do you put the word soul? Because isn't soul a godly thing?
That's why in the description of creation of the human being, it actually says two things. First, God says, let us make man, just like anything else. Let there be. Then it says he breathed the soul. So did he create man by saying, let there be? Or did he create man by breathing the soul into the body? When he said, let us make man, he created the human soul, animal soul, which is the soul of the flesh.
So do animals actually have that as well?
No.
Because animals were made by word.
Only. The animal was created only by the let there be. So when we say the animal soul of a Jew, we don't mean the soul of an animal. We call it animal soul because it animates the body. not because it's a goat. We also call it animal soul because it's instinctive rather than idealistic, like an animal.
So does all creation have that, all human creation have the animal soul?
All human,
humans
yes.
have the animal
Yes, in fact, it is the human soul. In contrast to the godly soul, we call it the animal soul. But it is the human soul. So let us make man, that's the human being. So because it is connected to the...
Because God actually formatted, did a form, that's why it became a soul. Because God actually formed a man, that's why it became one known as the animals, a creature with the animal soul.
because it was the soul that would animate the body, it is therefore...
Because he formed it? Like what? I understand when he blew into the body that he gave it a soul.
That's the godly
understand
soul.
The godly soul. I don't understand how, by forming it, just because God touched it, like...
Oh, the body, you mean?
Yes, the body.
Right. God formed the body, but then he gave it its own soul, not the one that's breathed, and that's why it's called the soul of the flesh.
Where do we see that he did that?
I don't know.
When he said, let there be a...
So first he made the human soul and the human body.
How did he give it its own soul? If he blew and
No, because that's one soul.
forming
Create a soul, yeah.
What he's in effect saying, when God blew the neshama into Adam, he was already a living being.
That's right.
But it was the life of the flesh, and we don't call that life. So when he breathed the godly soul, then it became a living being, meaning a godly being. But it had a life before. So 3 stages. He forms a body, he gives it a soul, and then he breathes a godly soul into it, in addition to the human soul. So again,
Still not until everyone had a godly soul. I was saying, to what point did everyone, if Adam had a godly soul, when did it become divided?
I mean, what was the first separation between the godly and the non? Cain and Hevel. Hevel was the good guy, Cain was the bad guy. So Hevel inherited the godly soul. I'm sorry, didn't inherit it.
Havel passed on.
Huh?
Havel didn't last long.
He didn't last very long at all, no.
She's
Like, by how much did Cain outlive Hevel?
long.
He was about 100 years older than his brother. But he didn't inherit it. I think here's the definition quickly. Until Avraham, God gave the godly soul to individuals. He gave it to Cain, maybe not to Hevel. I'm sorry, to Hevel, not to Cain. He gave it to Shem after the flood, not to Cham or Yafes. He gave it to Noach, not to Noach's father.
How Mr. Shalach didn't have?
Huh?
Mr. Shalach didn't have? Naya
Mr. Shalach did.
did. Who's next? Lemma.
Right. So it was given, I guess randomly, it was not inherited. So those who had a godly soul were different. And they could not pass it on to their children because it was not earthy enough to be carried by the genes or something. Once Avraham came, his godly soul was so absorbed and assimilated into his body that his children automatically Just like they inherited the color of his eyes, they inherited his godly soul. But not both of them. One of them. Yitzchak did. Yishmael did not.
So it has nothing to do with like your. In other words, I thought you were saying that the godly soul was part of the immediate beginning of in Bereshit's birth.
Because
But-
to have a
but
godly
that-
soul comes
but
from
that-
mother.
And that was inherently part of the design, but that, so then there's some aspect of what the alignment or the weight or the strength or the attraction or what that makes
The connection.
makes that individual being
The early-
reveal the godly aspect, godly soul.
The early connection between godly and physical was very tenuous. There was barely.
Mhm.
So those who had a godly soul, they just lived on a different plane, and it was not going to transfer to their children because they barely had it. But when it settled in, like in Avraham,
Why do you say Avraham, not Sarah?
a second, when it settled into Avraham to the degree that not only could he,
Teaching a woman's class here. One second.
yeah, not only could he pass it on, he couldn't not pass it. You know what I mean? It's like it became so much him that to give birth to a child without a godly soul is like a fish giving birth to a chicken. So his godliness was him, and therefore he had to produce a godly child, like a human being produces a human being. However, it wasn't so thoroughly earthed that every child would get it. So Yishmael did not. Yitzchak, the second generation, both of his children got the godly soul because you can't give birth to anything other than what you are. And Yitzchak was godliness, so he gave birth to godly. But Esav couldn't keep it. He lost his godly soul. He started off Jewish, but he lost it. By the third generation, when Yaakov came around, the soul was so permanently embedded into their being that it wasn't possible, and today it's still impossible to give birth to someone who isn't Jewish, and once you're born with it, you can't lose it. It's so much a part of you. So that was the process. It took 3 generations. And that's why we are called the children of Israel, Yaakov, because the godliness is so permanent in us, unlike Avraham and Yitzchak. So how did it become the mother that determines whether you're Jewish or not? Or how did the father lose his role and become irrelevant to the Jewishness of the child? So it's a terrible mistake. It's not like the father doesn't make Jewish children. In the case where a non-Jewish mother and a Jewish father produce a child, the father makes a Jewish child. The mother turns that Jewish child into a non-Jew by overwhelming the effect of the father. So what does it mean that we're matrilineal? It doesn't mean the father doesn't do anything. It means the mother's influence will overwhelm the influence of the father. So if someone were to say, is it possible for a Jew to become a non-Jew? There is one possibility. In the womb. In the womb, a Jewish child can become a non-Jew. Because the father's influence is kind of negligible. The mother's influence is powerful. So in the case where a Jewish mother with a non-Jewish father, why is the child a Jew? Doesn't the father have any influence? The mother's influence overwhelms the father's influence. Except for one interesting little detail. The non-Jewish father contributes to the birth of a Jewish child. So why are they not related? The father contributes by returning some lost spark of a Jewish soul that he is carrying, and it needs to get back home. By having a child with a Jewish woman, he returns that spark. But it was never his. So unlike a father that produces the child, this father simply contributes to the Jewishness of the child. And that spark is very powerful. And you look at some people whose fathers are not Jews, whose fathers are not Jewish, there's something special. There's something powerfully Jewish. Like about tshuva. A spark coming back, that's like tshuva. At any rate, the father does count. Right? So when a Jewish man has a child with a Jewish woman, he's not contributing to the Jewishness of the child? Of course he is.
So by the way, why do we discourage them marriage with a non-Jewish?
Well, first of all,
Yeah, it's like
first of all,
elevating
We
big
discharge
sugar.
of theirs.
This is a side point, I know, but I'm just asking.
we discourage it until the child is born. Because you don't know. If there's no child, then what are they doing? Just sinning? What about a non-Jewish man who has 10 children with a Jewish woman? They have 10 sparks. But once those sparks return to their source, the relationship is over. There's nothing more.
But the human,
Huh?
the human relationship, the human related.
The human part is not a marriage. Marriage is a godly thing. So they're still friends and they still like each other, but the marriage part doesn't. They don't need a divorce, a get. Okay, so the conflict between the two souls. What exactly is the conflict? So again, we get. It's not that the animal soul wants to sin and the godly soul wants to do mitzvahs. The conflict is not between mitzvah and sin. That's a very low level, a very discouraging picture of life. There's the danger that you're going to sin at any moment, and you have to. That's a miserable way to think, a miserable way to live. Watch yourself, you're going to sin. It's true, but it's not where our focus should be. The animal soul is not determined to sin. It might sin because it doesn't care. So if the candy is delicious, it's going to eat it, whether it's kosher or not. But it's not looking to sin, it's just looking for the pleasure. Whereas Yetzer Hara, as its name indicates, it wants the sin, it doesn't even want the pleasure. It will choose the sin even if the sin is less pleasurable. That temptation we should ignore or transcend and free ourselves of it. Like, kill your Yetzer Hara. Stop being fascinated by what is forbidden, just because it's forbidden. That we hopefully outgrow, at least to some degree. To sin just because you can, that's a little immature. So the animal soul is not looking to sin. It might include the sin if there's pleasure there. So what is the animal soul looking for? Pleasure. What's the godly soul looking for? Pleasure. But their pleasures lie in opposite directions. The pleasure of the godly soul is to free itself of itself. Like the flame. The godly soul doesn't want to be stuck in a finite, limited identity. The animal soul wants more of its finite identity. It wants to confirm it. It wants to solidify its particular identity. And that's why I can't stand you. Nothing personal. I just can't stand you. Because you want your individual identity confirmed. I want mine. And this town ain't big enough for the two of us. So it's either you or me.
I'm sorry, sort of spaced out. Are you talking about the conflict between the animal soul and the godly soul?
No, a conflict between me and you.
Two humans on what level?
On the human.
On the godly soul?
No. On the human level, your existence disturbs my existence. So the very fact that you exist is unacceptable.
Like, this town's too big for both of us,
right? Right. So somebody said, get a bigger town. Move to a bigger town. In other words, in the finite world, my existence is threatened by your existence. Because your existence demands that I not be so limited in myself, that I make room for you. Well, that threatens me. Because the direction of the animal soul is the opposite. Only me. It's all about me. So if you exist to be my best friend, oh, okay. Then you're welcome. If you're not there to be my friend or my servant or my slave, or if you're not there to help me be me, then you can't exist at all.
That explains anti-Semitism.
Among Jews, right?
When we're the Jews, that's exactly what the Jews represent in that existence. The fact that the Jews are here is in contradiction with the very existence of the...
Yeah. That's why we're uncomfortable. That's why we're uncomfortable with strangers, because I don't know how you're enhancing my existence. So are you there for me or not? If you're not there for me, then you can't be. So a simple description of the animal soul is the animal soul loves itself. It feels its own existence. I am me. And I have needs. And those needs must be fulfilled. And you threaten me. That's it. That's the nature of the human soul.
Where's its goodness?
That's why the Gemara says that a human being, even when they do good for someone else, kindness, it's for themselves. So yes, it's kind, but it's not altruistic. I'll be kind to you because it's good for me.
It's not always true.
Right.
There's a lot of altruistic people that do it without, just do it because, not for selfish reasons.
It depends on what we call selfish. If I'm doing it because you'll pay me, or somehow I'll get money from you, everybody agrees that's selfish. But if I do it for idealistic reasons, I'm doing it because I believe in kindness. I believe in giving back. The community was good to me, now I'm successful, I should give back. Is that not selfish? It's a much higher form, but it's still selfish. It's how I feel, it's what my instinct tells me. My idealistic instinct or my intelligence tells me that it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, but what if you're, I don't want to, what if you're like walking down the street and you see somebody needs help and you stop and help them and you keep going. You just do it because it's altruistic. Could be anybody.
You feel good about yourself after though, so maybe there's some
No, I mean, but
reward, immediate reward.
But it's like you just see a human being in need of help, or even an animal, and you just do it and then keep going. Sometimes you forget about it, but you just do it because it's in your nature to. Because there's another human being there, another something that needs, that's out. I mean,
Yeah.
How do you define altruistic? On one level, there is.
You're being kind to yourself if you're doing it. Is it
You think that's a selfish act? You think
yeah, because otherwise it's going to bother you if you don't do it.
I don't think it's, who's going to think if I don't do this it's going to bother me? You just
You.
see somebody in need and you help them, and that's it, period, and you keep going.
What if they scram back at you after you just helped them?
Oh, that happens.
As like
That's happened.
what's wrong with you? You put my bags down too hard, and then you're like,
Give
I
someone
just
down.
Sure, that just happened to me now, but I wasn't trying to do it to make myself feel better. I was really thinking of the other person.
then we feel bad afterwards. Oh, look at
Well,
that.
so,
they didn't
you
give
know
me
what,
I
it's
wanted.
somebody else has to deal with their
Selfish
issues
about
if they can't accept.
No, I mean, obviously there are times when we behave without thinking much. But the reason we behave that way is because of things that we did think about, or conclusions that we've come to. Like that example, a person sees somebody else suffering and says, boy, I'd hate for that to happen to me. Or that joke about some guys telling another guy his problems. One problem after another, and the guy keeps saying, yeah, well, could have been worse. The guy said, it was worse. I had another. He says, no, that could have been worse. He said, how could it have been worse? I said, it could have happened to me. So there is a little bit of a, I can't stand to see the sight of blood. Is that altruistic? But you're right. People are altruistic. But those people are different. There's a certain goodness that is natural and true goodness, which means altruistic, that righteous people have. It's a different soul. So there are actually three kinds of people. There are Jews, there are righteous non-Jews, and there are simple human beings. The simple human being is not capable of altruism. And therefore the good that they do has a reason, an intelligent reason. But the fact that it needs a reason means that it's not altruistic. In other words,
what's your reason, like, I know I have to do this because it's a mitzvah, Hashem commands me to do it, so pull myself together and do it.
That's not a reason.
That's not a reason.
On the contrary, it's saying, I have no reason to do this, but if God says,
Right. Okay.
So that's a big mitzvah,
Yeah.
according to what you said. What about if, let's say, somebody... All right, can I just ask you one more question? I'm sorry. What if you're happy for somebody else's nachas or simcha, and it
That's
has
even-
nothing to do with you?
that's even more altruistic than helping someone with their problem. In other words, empathizing with a person's pain is easier, more human, than empathizing with a person's pleasure. So to be happy for someone else when they're happy is even more idealistic or more altruistic than feeling their pain. So, why are the two souls incompatible? Because they're both absolutists. They can't see any other way. The godly soul can't see non-godliness. And the human soul can't see godliness because it threatens its existence. So if the godly means it's not about me, and the human means it is about me, so if the godly comes to the human soul and says it's not about you, well, then you're the enemy. Not about me? You threatening me? You want to destroy me? So they're allergic to each other. They can't tolerate each other. That's where we get the split personality or the conflict with the guilt. I should have, I don't want to, I should want to, I used to want to, maybe I'll want to tomorrow. Let's see more texts here. Text 11 describes the animal soul, which is also fascinating. He says in Tanya, chapter 1, from the animal soul come all the negative characteristics, namely anger, arrogance, lust for pleasure, frivolity, cynicism, boasting and idle talk, laziness and melancholy. See, none of them is a sin. There's no sin here. The animal soul is not by nature sinful, but it does have bad character traits, like laziness. It's not a sin, but it's bad. Melancholy is certainly not a sin, but it's bad. So if you remember, in Tanya he says that these seven traits, they come from the four elements: fire, air, water, and earth. And the four elements are not substances, like little tiny things. Four elements means four directions. Movement. Four types of movement. Fire goes upwards. Anger and arrogance go upwards. So the fire element produces anger and arrogance, the tendency to rise. Your anger flared up. Your arrogance means you're higher than everybody else. The element of water produces passion, desires. The element of air, desires means going down, pulls you down, because most pleasures that we have are from things beneath us, like food. Food is a plant. It's a vegetable. You're a human being. How does your pleasure come from a vegetable which is way beneath your level? But that's what it is. Passion pulls you downward, so it's like water that goes down. Air goes everywhere or nowhere At the same time, what does that produce? Frivolity. Like, yeah, we're just talking. Yeah, well, what were you saying? Nothing. No, we're just talking. That comes from the element of air, like an airhead. And also cynicism. Cynicism comes from air because it doesn't have an opinion. Whatever you say, it's nah. So what do you think? I don't have an opinion. I just reject your opinion because I don't like opinion. I like to leave my options open. So don't have a definite opinion. So whatever you say is like, yeah, well, you know, maybe you think so, but. So scoffing, for example, which is another way of translating, what does scoffing mean? It means I'm not going to give you an opinion. I'm going to avoid all opinion. And then there's the element of earth, which is the resistance to movement, heaviness. But what does that produce? Laziness and melancholy. I have no energy to do anything. So these are not sinful impulses, but they're bad. You want to do this learning exercise? Your anger comes from I am me or from I'm not me? Let's just do the first two. Anger and patience. Anger comes from I am me or from I'm not me?
It's all me.
It's all me. Why do I get angry? Because something is disagreeing with me. Not with my opinion. With me. So if you don't agree with my opinion, well then you hate me. Or I hate you. So it goes way beyond the opinion. It attacks the me. What, you don't agree with me? No. Why does that get you so angry? Because if you don't agree with me, you're threatening the me. Your very existence threatens the me. So the least you can do is agree with me. Get in my way. So anger certainly comes from the me. A person who is not so hung up on the me doesn't get angry. So somebody tells you you're a liar. And you say, yeah, probably. Because the issue is not whether you're a liar or not. The issue is whether it threatens you. If it doesn't threaten you, then yeah. Yes, I'm a liar. Whereas the me is so threatened, if somebody says, oh, I don't know, I thought you were taller. That's it, you're threatened. What did I say? Is that a criticism? It's not the topic that bothers me. It's that you're not on my side. So you got to go. You can't exist. Patience, on the other hand, you are patient to the degree that you are not you. That it's not about you. That's why the Alter Rebbe says, let's skip to the Tanya. 17. Text 17. The Alter Rebbe basically says like this. The second paragraph. Indeed, those for whom the body is the primary thing and the soul is secondary, here we're talking about the godly soul, they cannot achieve true love and brotherhood among themselves, only a love that is dependent on something. It really doesn't have to be personal gain, but something. And this is why Hillel said concerning the mitzvah of Avas Yisrael, this is the entire Torah, the rest is commentary. How is loving another Jew the whole Torah? And how is the rest of Torah a commentary? You can say this is the biggest mitzvah in the Torah. Okay. But to say the rest of Torah is a commentary? How is fasting on Yom Kippur a commentary on loving your fellow Jew? So the Rebbe says, because the basis and the root of the entire Torah is to raise up and exalt the soul above the body. What does it mean to fast on Yom Kippur? To focus your attention on the soul, not the body. Well, what do you think loving another Jew is? Getting past yourself, your body, into your neshama, and in the neshama, we're all the same, we're all connected. So Avas Yisrael is the most obvious expression of what the whole Torah is about. That it's not you. The not you shows best in the ability to love another person. So those to whom their individuality is important will never really connect to another human being. Because every other human being is antithesis, is threatening. Unless we have a common interest. Like in the building of the Tower of Babel. Everybody cooperated. They were all devoted to the same cause. Let's get this thing built. So on the one hand, what a great unity, what a great cooperation. But it wasn't selfless. It was that they both believed in the same cause, not that they were devoted to each other. So God separated their languages, and what happened? All of a sudden they couldn't build their project. Why? Because I don't understand you. So now we can't cooperate anymore. So what keeps us separate? Not the fact that you disagree with me or the fact that you're fighting me or... No, just your existence. You're not me, well then you can't be. So the animal soul does not leave room for godliness because it threatens it. Godliness means it's not about you. Well, then you're my enemy. Because it is about me. So humility is a threat to the animal soul. Actually, going back a little bit, let's go back to text 14. This sense of self can even be self-destructive. Why do people get depressed?
They don't live up to their own estimation.
Let's take a look what he says in Tanya. Often a person suffers from blockage of the heart. The heart becomes like a stone, and the person is unable by any means to open it to the service of the heart, namely prayer. In other words, you can't get excited. You can't inspire yourself, even if you try. At times the person is also unable to combat the evil impulse because of this heaviness of the heart. You become a victim to every weakness because you don't have the energy to fight it. And where does this come from? Go down a few lines. Due to its coarseness and crassness. The reason for this is the arrogance of the animal soul, which exalts itself over the holiness of the godly soul, obscuring and darkening its light. So a mashpia told us once, it starts off where your arrogance says, my parents can't tell me what to do. That's a threat to the me. You can tell me what to do? I'm me. Gotta be me. Gotta do it my way. So it starts off with you don't listen to your parents. Then you don't listen to your teacher. This is your teacher who you go to for advice. You admire, respect this person, and you look up to him. But if he tells you what to do, no way. You can give me your advice, I'll accept it or reject it, but you can't tell me. You're not the boss of me. So now your teacher can't tell you what to do. Eventually, as your arrogance grows, the Rebbe can't tell you what to do. And then God can't tell you what to do. Can it get worse than that? Yes. You can't tell you what to do. Your mind tells you you should do this, and you say, don't tell me what to do. The me rejects its own wisdom, its own opinion.
So what do you listen to?
Only your instincts.
Animal.
So when a person says, I'm becoming independent, I don't listen to my parents, I don't listen to my teachers, I don't listen to the Rebbe, I don't listen to God, I am now independent. No. You are losing your independence. And eventually you can't even control your own opinion. You stop listening to yourself. That's depressed. You tell yourself, get up and go. No. You're going to miss your appointment. I don't care. It's going to mess up your life. I don't care. That's depression. Depression means I, the me, has become so heavy, I can't even do what's good for me. Not if I have to get up. Not if I have to move. Certainly not if I have to change something. So it's a trap. You're locking yourself into an impossible. So if you follow the me and allow it to get too selfish, it will destroy itself. And that's called narcissism. Narcissism means when your selfishness has turned on itself. Up to a... Huh?
There's a lot there.
Very hard.
Is there a remedy for that?
Are people born like that?
Yeah, absolutely.
They are, right? At birth?
It's a disease of our time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So at first it starts off by being selfish to the exclusion of
She
you.
said it really good. She said that there is a way to combat it is by doing acts of kindness, giving to others, getting out of yourself.
No, but if you don't
Yeah,
dare,
but you
how do
can't
get
tell
to that
someone to do
point?
that if they don't. So very self
Well, before you get
to that
crippled.
point.
So at first, selfishness means you're the problem, get out of my way. But when selfishness turns to narcissism, I become my own problem. And I can't get out of the way. So who was Narcissus? He saw his own reflection in the water, and he was so enamored with himself, he couldn't pull himself away, and he just stayed there until he died from hunger.
Narcissus.
So what is the first line of help to someone who has fallen into that narcissistic place?
Tragedy.
Someone wanted to. Where does a person even begin to reach a person?
Okay. So far we have the extreme opposites. Mutually exclusive. Like two kings. Cannot tolerate the presence of another king. It's a threat, right? So each soul wants sovereignty. Tomorrow, actually, not next week, we'll be dealing with the question of free choice. Do you really have free choice? Okay. But right now, the question is, if your godly soul is so totally hung up on godliness, and the animal soul is so hung up on itself, and the two cannot see eye to eye on anything, how do you make a choice? The godly soul is not open to any ungodliness. The human soul is not open to any godliness. Where does choice come in? Different. You have two souls, and each of them is incapable of choosing. They're each locked into their opinion. Nobody's moving. So where's choice coming from? If we really have two souls, why are we not completely schizophrenic?
Oh, maybe we're talking all about what is the me, or what is the I. So then, yeah, it's beyond the two. Has to be beyond the two souls. That's what it is. Okay. No, all good now.
There is some room for compatibility. And much of Hasidus is devoted to explaining that compatibility. So when the Alter Rebbe tells you have two souls, that's not the end of the conversation. That's just the beginning. Given that you have two souls, how do you bring them together? If you have a Yetzer Hara and a Yetzer Tov, you don't want to bring them together. You just want to kill one of them. Hopefully the Yetzer Hara. It says David HaMelech killed his Yetzer Hara by fasting. Some guy said, I killed my Yetzer Tov by eating. I ate it to death. So hopefully you're killing your Yetzer Hara. And that's fine. That's simple, not complex. I mean, not easy, but simple. When you have two souls, it's not so simple, because you can't kill either one. So to simply say, ignore your animal soul, that's not an answer. There must be some compatibility. There must be some way of bringing them together. In fact, the Beinani, which the whole Tanya is the Sefer the Beinani, the whole purpose of the Beinani's life and service is to bring the animal soul up to the godly soul's level. Now it's true that part of doing that is by humbling the animal soul, not by destroying it. So you have to convince your animal soul that it's not about you, but it is about your contribution. the animal soul makes a great contribution to the godly soul by not being itself. What enables the animal soul to rise above itself? The objectivity of its intelligence. Sometimes that's called the third soul, the nefesh hasichlis. But it's really the intelligence of the animal soul. Human intelligence agrees that maybe there's something more to life than me. Theoretically. In principle. So yes, I am me, and I must be me, and I need to be me, and I got to do it my way. But the brain says, what else is possible? That's the gift of intelligence. So your mind can think its way out of your box. That's called thinking out of the box. What is the box? The box means it's all about me. The mind can actually dare to explore the possibility that maybe there is something else. In simple words, I have a very strong opinion. And of course I think I'm right. I know I'm right. But how can I prove it? Why do I need to prove it? That's the effect of the intelligence. The intelligence says, I have an opinion, how do I prove that it's correct? See, there's a certain humility there. Even in math, how do you know that 4 minus 2 is 2? Right, they teach you this actually. How do you know that 4 minus 2 is 2? Because 2 plus 2 is 4. See, you always have to find like something that legitimizes or proves that you're right. Why do I need to prove it? Because intelligently, it might be different. That's what intelligence does. Intelligence says, all I've ever experienced was this little town. But maybe there's another town. Maybe there are things I haven't seen yet. So your brain takes you beyond yourself. Even to the point of agreeing that maybe I'm not that important. Theoretically. Intellectually. But that's the beginning, the opening to where godliness can become real to the animal soul. Like, maybe there's a higher purpose for my existence. Maybe the godly soul is starting to make sense. There's got to be a higher purpose. I didn't create myself, so I'm here to serve something else. It's starting to make sense to the human soul. Now, if that starts to make sense to the human soul, and the human soul adopts it, the devotion and the intensity and the enthusiasm that it's going to have for godliness will be greater than the enthusiasm that the godly soul has for godliness, because to the godly soul, that's just normal.
Could you repeat that? That was a little complicated.
Starting from where?
That was last week's class.
But let's take it a step further. It's not just that the human mind, the intelligence, which is basically objectivity, can objectively doubt itself and need to prove itself and maybe consider the other opinion, which is a great gift. That's what we call intelligent emotions. When the intelligence brings a little objectivity to the emotions, then the emotions become more intelligent-like. The emotion itself can question itself. I'm very angry. Do I have to be? Am I so justified in my anger? So usually emotions can't question themselves. They're not objective. But if you bring intelligence to the emotions, then the emotions are open to suggestion. Maybe I don't have to hate you. Maybe I don't have to be angry. Maybe I don't have to be so lazy. That's what washing your hands does. Netilas Yodayim, washing your hands with the cup and pouring the water over the hands, it's bringing the mind and its nature to the emotions, so that the emotions can be a little bit objective like the mind. But there's something more. It turns out that the true definition of human being, whose instinct is, it's all about me, the true nature of the human being is that it resents being human. The nature of the human being is a rebellion against the human condition.
That's the Jew. That's the Jewish or
The human being. So we can define the human being in terms of, what are you? I'm selfish, all those 7 traits, you threaten me, and yeah, that's what is. But what is the direction? What is the instinct of this human being? I resent it all. I refuse to accept it. I want to be something bigger. So it's not just that I can think out of the box. I need to get out of the box. Because if I stay in the box, I'm an animal, not a human being. The human instinct is to rebel against what I was created to be. And that's why when you tell a person, you know, you're not so smart. I hate that. You're not so strong. You're not so big. You're not so rich. You're not so... I hate that. Because my instinct as a human being is, I will not accept limitations. Not because I want to be me, but because I resent being me. That's why we're so allergic to any definition. Oh, so you're the type of person who does that? No. No, I can do the opposite. You're really good at something. Oh, excuse me? I'm good at everything. Not arrogance, the opposite. Don't limit me. I hate my own limits. So, just talking about
So is that the seed of the godly soul and the animal soul?
That's what allows some communication between them. Because the godly soul comes to the human soul and says, you know, you don't have to be locked in. There is an option. And the godly soul that hates being locked in, the animal soul that hates being locked in, is like, really? That's what I've been looking for. Tell me more. So, the godly soul is the option that the human soul is looking for. Or as the Rebbe once put it, the animal soul is ready for Mashiach. It doesn't want to be an animal anymore. But the godly soul is so humble that if God wants us to stay in Golus another day, okay, who am I to argue? So it's really the godly soul that's getting in the way. So the animal soul already wants to stop being an animal. How do you stop being an animal? By rebelling against the conditions that you were created with. Yeah, it's a fascinating story. A guy tells me that when he was in yeshiva, a very non-Hasidic yeshiva, he started learning a little bit of Tanya, and he liked it, and he decided that he was going to stop shaving because a beard is holy. Well, his family was very upset. He was only 15 and 16. And the family didn't like the look. And his yeshiva didn't like it. So the dean of the yeshiva, the Rosh Yeshiva, kept telling him to shave. And he argued, Jewish custom, Jewish look. The Rosh Yeshiva had a beard. Yeah, but that's only because you're a Rosh Yeshiva, you know. Anyway, he fought, he argued, and kept the beard. But then one day, the teacher said to him, Rosh Yeshiva said to him, you know there are hippies? You know the hippies? You heard about the hippies?
What, some of us.
No, he said to the boy,
Yeah.
you heard about the hippies? They don't shave. They have beards. If you walk around with a beard, people might think you're a hippie. And that's a Chilul Hashem. And Chilul Hashem, that's serious. It scared him. And he decided that he needs to talk to the Rebbe. So when his birthday came, they gave, you could go in for your birthday. So he asked for an appointment. He went. This guy is telling me this 60 years later. 50 years later. He said, I went to the Rebbe. And I told the Rebbe my problem. And the Rebbe said to me that according to the Zohar and according to Kabbalah, the beard, I didn't understand the word. Couldn't follow. Then the Rebbe said to me the strangest thing. The Rebbe asked me, you know that when Jews were in Mitzrayim, they sunk to the lowest level of unholiness possible. One more level and they would be lost forever. So they were in 49 depths of evil. If you go to the 50th level, you're finished. And yet we're told that what merit gave them earned them the exodus, the redemption. They didn't change their names, they didn't change their clothes, and they didn't change their language. So the Rebbe said, if they're in the 49th level of unholiness, where did all this holiness come from? They appreciated the Hebrew language, the holy tongue. They dressed modestly, and they kept their Hebrew names because they're holy. Where did all this holiness come from if they're in the 49th level of unholiness? So of course he didn't have an answer. So the Rebbe said, they didn't change their name, their language, and their clothing, not because it was holy, but because they were nonconformists. They wouldn't change their names because, don't tell me what my name is. And they didn't change their clothing because I don't have to dress like you. And they didn't change their language because this is my language. Don't tell me what. In other words, it came from rebelliousness, not from holiness. But because they were rebellious, they were able to change and come out of it. So it's not they earned it by being rebellious. They were capable of making a change because of their rebellious nature. And then the Rebbe went through a list of famous hippies by name. Ginsburg, Cohen. Right? See, they didn't change their names. And their clothing, they don't dress like anybody else when they do dress. And their language, nobody understands them. They talk their own language. So the hippies of today are like the Jews in Mitzrayim.
Well, I just read a thing that
So this guy says, I don't understand what the Rebbe was saying. What are we saying? That it's good to be a hippie? The Rebbe was saying, if somebody mistakes you for a hippie, it's not a chilul Hashem. On the contrary. They'll think you have an individual spirit, and with that spirit, you can accomplish great things. So, it turns out that the human condition, properly understood, is not in conflict with the godly soul. The human condition hopes for salvation. The human condition yearns to get past the human condition. Where does it find an alternative to the human condition? In the godly soul. So it turns out that they're actually compatible. Not by their nature, but by their desire. The godly soul wants to serve God. The human soul wants to get out of its condition by serving God.
You know, speaking of the hippies, I recently read a thing that the Rabbi had made a public statement that that we should appreciate them because they were infusing a certain kind of energy that affects society, and that you know what I'm talking about, right? And it was very refreshing to read how he was his perspective on it. Whenever he said, when everybody else around him was putting them down, he was embracing their enthusiasm and their fresh way of looking at the world.
So the way to describe it is, they didn't have the answer, but they knew the problem.
Oh, they were seekers. So they found Hasidus.
So they were saying,
No.
this is not enough. This is not the solution. They tried to find the solution and looked in very strange places. And learned the hard way that that's not the solution either. So no, they didn't have the answer. But there was a need for an answer. And that was not coming from some spiritual place. It was coming from the human condition that does not want to be human.
Well, it wants to tap into its godly soul?
Something. It doesn't know what.
But it didn't know how to get there because they weren't raised
Right.
like that.
So for a while it was infatuated with Buddhism.
Because that's a reflection, but it's not the real thing.
Alternative lifestyles, free love, open marriage, communal living. They tried all sorts of possible solutions and found them unsatisfying. One woman at Beis Chana made an incredible statement. She said, you know, I don't think I fit in here. Because she heard all the other women saying they had this spiritual awakening and they had this experience and they had this encounter with whatever that inspired them and so on. And she says, I didn't have any such experience. I said, so why are you here? She said, because, there's nothing out there. There's just nothing out there. I said, you're more on target than the rest of them. This is not a spiritual journey. This is the realization that there's nothing out there. There's got to be something else. That's the human condition in its healthiest form. When the human being is content with its humanness, he's not quite human. That's the energy that the Rebbe appreciated and used. Like, what do you mean stop somebody and put tefillin on it? What is that going to do? This awareness that human beings are not content being human, that's what makes miftzah possible. That's what makes tshuva possible. You're not selling them a product. You're answering their question that they themselves don't fully understand and are not fully conscious of. Their question is, what more is there? And that hunger, that unsatisfied feeling, can be misunderstood. They think they need more money. They think they need more fame. They need more. So they try that, and it doesn't work. Like, there's a big crisis that has suddenly come to the surface. Suicide. People are killing themselves. Successful people. But we've talked about this many times. Depression is more likely to happen to an affluent, successful society than in third world countries. Because the third world country still thinks that they will get something more when they become rich. The rich guy knows that is not an answer. And the hunger has not gone away. So you figure, that's it. I've tried everything. I quit.
Outwardly, but they didn't go inward.
So when they misinterpret the hunger, like that story about the princess who married the peasant, and the peasant, being kind and devoted, was very bothered that the princess was unhappy. So he brought her more tomatoes. And it didn't make her happy. So he brought more potatoes. And it didn't make her happy. So he did everything that his peasant understanding allowed, and she's just getting more miserable. So finally he says to her, what is wrong with you? I've given you everything a person can possibly want. And you're not happy? So the princess says, your sincere attempt to make me happy makes me unhappy, because you obviously don't know what a princess needs. So your best efforts convince me that you'll never be able to provide what I want. Because what's making me unhappy is not the lack of tomatoes or the shortage of potatoes. It's what I was used to in the palace. Royalty. So what's the solution? The body cannot give the person what it needs. In other words, the human being, the peasant, cannot satisfy itself, its own hunger, because it thinks the hunger is for potatoes and tomatoes. So it tries. And it just makes the person more miserable, because that's not the answer, that's not the answer.
So why is there that suicide in the non-Jewish world, if all they have is
Those
the
were two
animal
Jews last
soul.
week. No,
What?
those were two Jews last week.
They were two, no, Kate's is Jewish, I think.
I think so.
I know the guy was Jewish, he just found
Oh,
out.
she looks very Jewish.
He was Jewish?
I think so.
What, his mother? No, Kate's Spade. Oh.
Anyway, it doesn't matter, there's people.
But regardless.
No, if they're not,
regardless if there's-
Jews who like.
we're
No,
talking.
I'm
I
saying
mean, they
money.
both went because of
No,
lack of
I-
love.
We're yeah, we're talking about the human condition. Human beings are not content.
Condition, doesn't it just want more of the physical world?
No. See, that's the problem. We
Only
think
if
we.
it has the spiritual soul, then it wants spirituality, but it doesn't have the godly soul, then what does
So what does a
it know?
non-Jew want?
What does it want? What does
He,
it
do-
know?
he doesn't know. That's
No, but
our
what does the
job.
soul- but what does the animal soul want more than what it has?
It doesn't know. That's the problem. It wants something more, and it doesn't know what there is.
But I'm saying if all they have
But
is
if they
the
don't have the
animal
godly
soul,
soul.
then what? Yeah.
And what are they yearning for?
This is what I'm saying.
What you said to begin with was what it wants is gravity. It wants to go back to the earth. That's so.
Right.
The only way it wants something opposite is if it has something opposite,
Potential
contrary to
for
what.
something else.
Exactly.
He said it has intelligence, which opens it up to that.
Right. It is pulled downward. It doesn't like that. That's what I'm saying. Take away the godly soul. The human condition is a rebellion against the human condition.
So how does a guy be a Jew
Yeah.
towards the godliness? How
But that's why we have a responsibility to tell the world about God and how to serve God, because they desperately are looking for it.
How do we do that? I mean, you do that
To
because
some-
you have a following, but how does someone like me do that?
To some degree, we've already done it. The whole world knows about God and about the Torah and about the commandments.
People have religion, non-Jews. They have religion. They think they're fine.
Because it's the wrong religion.
So unless they all convert.
Not convert, but live by Torah.
But their 7 laws, they're kind of a little bit limited in a way that they can perform all the 7 laws but still not have aspiration.
Just like a Jew can be frum and not serve God.
Yeah, can you explain that?
So how do you nurture this
If you're
godly?
firm, aren't you serving God?
You're not doing good for yourself. You're not doing mitzvah to feel good for yourself, but you're doing it for God. How do you cultivate and nurture that state?
That's what Chassidus is. Chassidus came along and said, "You are starving. Can I tell you what you're starving for?" So some people said, I'm not starving. So Chassidus says, you are, you just don't know it. So those who were starving jumped at it. And that was a large part of the Jewish population of Europe. Chassidus became like wildfire because they knew they were starving, and this seemed to be the answer. But then there were those who claimed to not be starving. That's a bigger challenge. So that's why you stop a Jew in the street and you put on tefillin with him. That will stimulate their appetite. They will realize that they are starving. And now the non-Jewish world is coming to the Jew and say, you know, we thought we had a religion, we thought we had answers. We're starving. So the Rebbe said, okay, time to fulfill our obligations to the non-Jews. Until now, they claimed to not be starving, and they resented any suggestion. Now they're starving. They want to hear. So, in the end, It's not that the godly soul will win over the animal soul. This is not a war. This is an educational process. You educate your animal soul until it becomes godlike. That's the difference between before Hasidus and after Hasidus. Before Hasidus, it was a war. Somebody's going to have to die. Something is going to have to be killed. And that's why those who were religious were so intimidated by those who weren't. Because those who weren't religious represented the other side, and the other side has to be killed. Hasidus came along and said, nothing has to be killed. The Eibishter didn't create a world to have it destroyed.
Okay, so then I have a question about that. Can I ask?
Hmm?
What happened by the Teva? You made a mistake?
By the what?
By the Teva. You made a world. What happened?
Oops.
It sounds like let's press the restart button. Seriously. Is that too much for now?
And well, we're finished, right?
Yeah.
Now we can talk about anything you want. In the maturing process of an individual, we have that kind of, when you go from being a child to being an adult, you have to wipe out everything and start all over again. If you don't make that radical change, you remain stuck in some juvenile condition. So the world was going through the process of maturation. In some sense, you indulge a child, you spoil the child, you allow the child to be a child. And then comes a point where, okay, now you got to stop that. You stop spoiling the child, you stop allowing free rein to the child. That's what happened. For 1,000 years, the world was allowed. It's almost like explore your existence. It's all new to you. 1,000 years of a vast experiment. People tried all sorts of ridiculous things because they didn't know what was right and what was wrong. And it was tolerated for 1,000 years because when you're a child, you got to find your own way. But at the end of that 1,000 years, God said, okay, time to grow up.
That's a cute analogy, but is that what happened?
Yeah. In Kabbalistic language, it was 1,000 years of kindness, tolerance, patience, like you have with a child. And then order had to be brought in. Start eating like a mensch. Start dressing like a mensch. Stop the childish indulgences. And it was a shock. It was a radical change. But it has to happen. So for the first 1,000 years, you can live endlessly. You can grow tall. You can be stronger than. Everything was huge. Everything was indulgent. People could do whatever they wanted, and they were not punished for 1,000 years, like children. And in that experimentation, we were sometimes at our ugliest. People were at their ugliest. I mean, if you can experiment with everything.
Like the Torah doesn't talk so much about the first 1,000 years. There's like, what, 1.5 parshas about it? So how important was it for creation that it goes through that process if we can? Or maybe there's more I need to learn.
It was
because there's so much detail on every letter, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, but you're right. It's very brief, because that was just the preparation. That's not what life is really about. It was a stage of childhood. Torah is not about childhood. Torah is about maturity. So we got past the childhood stage. Now let's get detailed and elaborate on what life really is.
That's like in this corner, if anybody noticed. It's like one of these things. First it's the baby, then it's the toddler, then it's the thing, and it grows and grows, and then to the end of the to the end. Do you have this book at home? You have to look at this. It's like one of these things. It grows and grows.
There's another question. You said something about Nebelosser pinning the mind over the emotions. What is that? I don't think I remember.
The explanation given for Netilas Yadayim is that water. You can turn it off. Huh? Is that water represents intelligence, and the hands represent emotions. Pouring water over your hands is like bringing intelligence to the emotions. And that's why we pour the water. You don't dip your hands into the water, because you don't drown your emotions.
Are you washing it off? What are you doing? Rinsing it?
But you said bringing emotions to the intelligence. That's what
Intelligence to the emotion.
So you just combine them. It's not bringing one to the other. It's just your uniform, because one.
It's bringing some element of intelligence to the emotions without drowning the emotion,
Oh, you said that bringing
not stifling the
emotions
emotion.
to intelligence. That's what I meant.
So what part of intelligence can you bring to the emotion?
Find that.
Not brilliance, not logic, objectivity. The mind is objective, the heart is subjective. But if you can introduce a little objectivity to the heart, you have intelligent emotions. Not smart,